Steve, I actually looked at your website before I came here because I was hoping to book on something lately with you. So if you've got anything tomorrow afternoon,
That's an offer you can't refuse.
Check my diary.
I really like the way that you talked about a couple of really simple messages for photographers, like using a long lens, if you can afford one, and staying in your car. And I wondered if you had any simple messages we might use to encourage walkers, and particularly dog walkers, to think about how they impact on brown nesting birds on moorland and also on our waders on our shoreline.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, is that one. I mean, obviously, dog walkers, if you're up on the moors, especially through the breeding season, they should really keep the dog on the lead. And there is signs everywhere in the nesting birds about keep dogs on leads. It doesn't happen. So sometimes if you can talk to them and have a word with them to try and do that, obviously that does help. And stick to the paths, basically, because you do see some people just going off willy-nilly and they're suddenly walking and standing on curlew eggs or whatever. So it's trying to somehow, and we obviously when we're doing our trips, we do leave the vehicle sometimes. We do go walking in certain areas, especially in some of the valleys, but we do obviously stick to the paths. You don't just go roaming through destroying orchids or any wildlife like that. So it's trying to get a message across, which we do when we send out our information. We've got the sort of country code that we send for photographers and for general walking. So it's trying to stick to the paths, depending on what time of year. And if you've got dogs, that can be especially down at the seal colony. I know that the National Trust monitor it down there, and they've had problems with, and I've even seen it myself, and I've had words in a nice way to. Because you think, are they doing it on purpose where there's a seal pup and there's a dog off lead? But sometimes you just, no disrespect, you're talking to people that haven't got anything upstairs, you know, and you say to them, can you just put your dog on a lead? Oh yes, sorry, I forgot, you know, and it's just, they've just forgot. Whereas it's not done on purpose, but they do need to be told because they just don't understand. Because they'll say, oh, my dog's fine, it's never attacked anybody. Yeah, it's nice, you know, it won't attack that seal, and the next minute it just doesn't have to attack the seal, it just has to go somewhere near it to stress it out. And so it's trying to get that education across, which can be tricky at times.
George?
Well, we're just expanding on that really, because you know,
sorry, say who you are, George.
Sorry, George and Darley. I'm a long-time council member or trustee, I think I am, of the Norfolk Moors Association. Also, land manager in the Norfolk Moors. So, and representative of things like Moorland Association and things like that. So dogs on the moors is a big issue for us, and I don't know, is Kate still here? Kate Ashbrook? No,
she's
gone. But I went to ask her what the sort of advice is, but one of the things that we're talking about doing under using the FIPL applications, which are the latest thing, we're possibly trying to promote the positive management of dogs by. One idea that we've had is to identify areas where dogs are welcome to be let off the lead, because that's the case. You know, in the ideal world, they wouldn't bring the dog. If they have to bring a dog, if they keep it on a lead, the problems are reduced massively. But actually, you know, as the groan that came out a moment ago, you know, if you've got a dog and it's got legs long enough about that, you're gonna want to let it off the lead at some point. That's what it does, and you're gonna do it. You know, that's what's going on. So whether we can provide places for them to do that, and then promote those and get the people who want to bring their dog exercise off the lead, and it's partly visitors, but it's also residents and people who are coming to you know, regularly living in the villages. That's where they want to go. But actually, this is a breeding time of year, so you know, perhaps this might be next 3 or 4 months might be a good idea not to come here, but in other words, you know, try a different route, try somewhere else. But I wonder whether you might be able to, Susan, be able to help us out, because getting the messages out to people before they come.
Yeah, actually, we have a list of dog-friendly accommodations. So as you were speaking, I was thinking we need to mail those to tell. If you say this is where we'd like you to go, not go, and we can get those businesses to convey that information to their guests. So absolutely, yeah. If you want to just send me an email, then we'll do that, and that's easily done. Yeah, absolutely.
David, is that something on your patch, the issue?
Well, it is in parts, and similar to George. And again, we've got areas where we're quite happy for dogs to go, and areas which we're extremely sensitive at certain times of year. So directing them where we want them, and
we need to be really explicit, don't we?
Yeah, map it out. And if you give someone, it's like, you know, the right to roam. If you give somebody a linear mown path, they're going to walk across it rather than wading through heather and bracken. That's not human nature. But if you give them somewhere to take their dog, then they'll take it.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Mark, a question for Andy on Glover. I've heard different comments on Glover today. I think Tom said this morning the world's moved on, we shouldn't sort of worry about that. But in your view, should we be kicking up a fuss collectively about the letdown that Glover has been so far in terms of nothing happening? I mean, should we get feisty? We talked about this morning about getting worked up about things. Should we get feisty about bloody Glover?
Glover's off.
I think that's. I think it's not straightforward, because I would love to see some really positive action from the government on national parks, obviously. But I think that some of what Glover suggested wouldn't be helpful. And therefore, for instance, on a National Landscape Service, I think it would be great if there was something at a national level that could act as a ginger group, an overseer, give some strategic thoughts, and could contrast and compare the performance of different national park authorities. But what I wouldn't want to see happen is the independence and enthusiasm of individual national park authorities subsumed into a centralised monolith. And that's my fear. And that's sort of why I did the context, because my worry at the moment is a new statutory body would be filled with people who were bothered about being on another statutory body and about making sure that everything was done okay. And you know, quite often what the national park authorities have done really well is push the boat out, have been the first in the country to do this thing and to challenge things, but by showing you can do things differently. My fear would be if you would lose that if you had a tight control from the centre. And frankly, and I don't trust the centre to run things efficiently either.
Or at all.
You know, or indeed at all. So, you know, I think that tactically it's worrying. But should we be saying, government, where is your positive response to national parks? Most definitely could. Personally, I think we should be pushing forward a much, much more ambitious agenda.
Might be on for Rose afterwards. Yeah, Helen, yeah. So, Helen, sorry, at the back. Yeah, sorry.
I'm Kay from Salonia National Park, but I'm speaking in a personal question.
Yeah.
Salonia Society, sorry. About making parks more accessible. Most people that come to a lot of the new kind of people who are coming simply cannot map read. And I think we need maybe more shorter, very well marked files for people who are simply saying, what do I do? Regarding Snowdon, people climb it because you can't possibly get lost. If there were more obvious paths up mountains like Mole Shepherd or other more remote places, you know, perhaps more people would go there. But also, regarding accessibility, styles are a big issue for older people. My mother is nearly 90. She can walk really well, but she had a hip and she cannot climb ordinary type styles. But she's great with a kissing gait or even steps up and down with a wide platform. And so many paths, I'm always thinking, could Mum do this? Oh no, there's a style. And it's such a shame because it's really preventing her and other people like her from actually accessing the paths that are available.
Right. So 2 parts really, isn't it? More well-promoted, easy paths and making them more accessible. I don't know who wants to have a go at that. You want to kick off, Andy? It's your...
Yes, one of the parks, I think the Lakes or the Dales has pioneered a gradation. There's a sort of 1, 2, 3. Someone in the audience must know, I'm sure.
I'm pretty sure it's the Peak District.
The Peak District.
I think so.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's the park here and other parks are copying it, and so you have 1, 2, 3 different categories which show whether this is something that can be used by users of different abilities. And that is an excellent idea, and I think that sort of deals with a lot of what you're saying. I think that as a whole, in general, in terms of having short, simple, guided routes, the parks are generally all very good at that. But I think one of the many sadnesses of the financial position is particularly those things. I think paths for disabled people, they're exactly the sort of thing which wrongly get cut out because that we just can't do everything.
I think it was a Cotswolds A&B who had a series of leaflets called Miles Without Styles, which is a great idea. Yeah, and the Dales, absolutely right. I know they have a policy on all the easy paths, and say bits of the Dales Way, where there are lots of visitors, putting stiles, getting rid of stiles and putting pedestrian gates in, and that makes a huge difference.
I'd just like to say, though,
please.
The Cleveland Way now is style free.
There you are. The whole Cleveland Way.
Well,
so that's yeah.
Those styles are
David Caldwell, South Downs National Park, South Downs Society. I'll do it right one day.
I'm sure it's the same thing, really. Yeah,
South Downs Society has actually been funding the removal of stiles along the South Downs Way, and there's still some way to go on it, but exactly for that reason, for disabled access.
Well, what about this concept of actually promoting less heavily used bits to take the pressure off the honeypots? Is that anything anyone likes to comment on?
I think people are just information hungry. They don't always access the information the way we might expect or might want them to do, but they want the information. And a little while ago we did short routes here in the North York Moors, but not just short routes, but we talked about the things people can do on the way, and then also with refreshments, because there seems to be the traditional approach for a lot of national parks is here's the bit of the website with the walks and here's the bit with all the places to eat and drink, without actually connecting the two. And then we say we don't want too many walkers because they don't spend any money. Well, that's because we don't facilitate it. And I know along the Cleveland Way another project was signposting to the settlements, because when you're on a long distance journey, quite often you don't know that only a mile away is a fantastic pub. And so I think doing that is really helpful.
So tea shop walks, pub walks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
For you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, please, sorry.
Thank you very much. Yes, Debbie Trebilco, North Yorkshire Rural Commissioner. I should say ex-North Yorkshire. I have a question for David, if I may. Intrigued to hear all the things that are going on in the estate. Very exciting. I was especially intrigued by your last slide, which said actually improving biodiversity. This morning we were looking forward 10 years. Could you give us a beautiful illustration of what your high moors, your sport moors, will look like in terms of enhanced biodiversity within 10 years?
Okay. We'll certainly be building off a strong platform. I mean, there's no question of that. But in terms of bird life and flora and fauna, but they will be looking similar in terms of heather cover than they are now, because we obviously need that for the grouse. But yeah, we work hard to maintain and protect what we've got, and that's certainly in our keeper's psyche. So an improvement of what we've got, but forecasting it 10 years hence is quite difficult. But
to come in, good question, but maybe your action is, they've got not one but 3 layers of designation on top of them to do with biodiversity. They're SSSI, SPA and SAC. The very nature of that means that you're not looking to change. They're designated because they're very good. They are the best examples, best in class of what they do, and they've been designated because they don't really want that to change. So it's quite difficult to sit there saying, actually, we're going to make some sort of dramatic change. We're going to have, lesser spotted tigers wandering all over it. Or something. I think there's things that we can do. I think one of the things we need to do generally across the moors is just do more counting, because I don't think many people actually really know what we've got. Different things get counted at different times. you know, we're just getting involved in a Merlin project, which has got some lottery funding of some sort to actually, for the first time ever, I think, hopefully we're going to put some satellite tags on Merlin chicks and find out where they go when they leave the moors, and what happens to them, and you know, do they come back to the same place, same nest, all the rest of it. We're going to learn a lot more about that. I think there's an awful lot we can do on the insect front, learning much more about the moths, particularly bees and things, which I just don't think at the moment we just sort of slightly take it for granted on it all. So I think that would be how I would answer that question.
And I think we're doing a very good. I mean, maybe I would say it, wouldn't I? But I think generally, you know, being close to our keepers the last 18 months, they do an amazing job. But I don't think we're very good at telling people what we are doing and what we have. And that's part of the point.
Will you still be burning heather in 10 years' time?
Well, that depends on people other than me, but I hope so. Yeah.
Well, unless it stops growing.
Yeah.
If it stops growing and we don't have a wildfire risk, then we won't need to burn it.
Yeah.
But
some of the examples of
then keeping a wildfire resilient landscape will be the number one priority. It needs to remain as the number one priority.
As long as people stop accusing us of burning deep peat, which is actually A, there isn't any much deep peat, and B, we're not doing it and we don't want to do it. The people who are deep peat burning are the people who have the common right to take it out of the peat. We're planting sphagnum mosses. We just spent tens of thousands of pounds under the HLS scheme re-wetting and doing a massive peat bog restoration on the High Moor. So I hope. I mean, they've been burning heather for not just for grouse shooting, but for livestock grazing all around the world for hundreds of thousands of years. So yes, is the answer to whoever asked that question. Yes.
And I'm feeling Andy wants to come in on quickly on this one.
Yes, I think two or three things. One is that the wildlife of importance in the North York Moors is changing, has changed because of climate change. And we can't, I mean, someone in the 80s did a map of the UK and picked out a few species and looked at Merlin and predicted that by this time it would be disappearing from the lower slopes of the North York Moors. And lo and behold, that's what's happening. And at the same time, we're getting southern species, nightjar, woodlark, and we'll probably get dark for warmer. So, there's a reality to this. It will happen. It is happening. That's one thing. Two, we need to be ambitious and not just say, well, we'll see what comes. And we've got to, I think, as National Park, start saying, we want these new things here. And grazing by the right things, by the right herbivores, is really important in that. And thirdly, we must have a way of controlling fire. Fire is a really important management tool, but it's got to be controlled and used for the public good, and it's not at the moment.
Wow. And you wanted, go on.
Yeah, I just want to follow up because I think it's really interesting. The other way of looking at it maybe is we talked a bit about wildlife tourism, and Steve's a fantastic example of a business that he's built up, and he's built a fantastic business based on wildlife tourism, which is your business. The other side of it is we've got the big areas of land, the big estate owners, the big public sector owners of land. Is there a realistic economic future for wildlife tourism as opposed to, say, the shooting interests, which is a driver of the economy on the estates at the moment? Do you see that as a viable future?
Well, there's some very good examples of it. Knepp Estate in Sussex. They've rewilded and turned it into a hugely successful. A friend of mine manages it. So.
Do you think it would work for you?
I don't think it works for everybody. It works for certain places, but around our water park, I was just saying to Steve, I forgot to, I had too much to say in my bit, but the wildlife around our gravel lakes, partly because they've been fantastically restored by Hanson's, I have to say. I mean, it is beautiful, and all full credit to them and the county planning authority for making them restore it as such. But we've got one of the best moth sites in certainly the United Kingdom, if not in Europe. 425 different species of moths, 150 species of birds, 49 different dragonflies, and 7 different species of bats. So all operating around lots of different people. And when we've been busy around the main lake, they've maybe just moved a bit further into the water park. So yeah, we it's probably another strand to our bow in terms of the water park, isn't it? And accessing, because not everybody wants to go on the wakeboard line or on the aqua park or on the paddleboard. You know, lots of people will and do want to photograph it.
So could there come a point when wildlife tourism begins to overtake grouse shooting economically, or are we too soon in that one?
Surely shooting is the ultimate high value wildlife tourism. Actually,
Tougher than wildlife, some of it. Yeah, that's great. Great. Sorry, somebody here is desperate for a... Yeah, sorry.
Paul Rice from the Crawl Society. More information. You were talking about at-risk buildings and stuff like this, etc. We actually embarked, when I was a Crawl Society member, on creating an at-risk register on buildings that weren't listed, i.e. foreshore chalets along the Broads. But we also, I managed to persuade them to look at land areas as well. And one of the first things that went on, there was actually a local gardener, a chap called Ken Lake, who's famous for his big lake from Stoke Potter High. So that is on the at-risk register. It's not, what's the word, there's no legislation to protect it, but we will certainly make a fuss if anyone tries to develop it. It's just an idea that perhaps you might want to take on. Just for Steve, Horsey, a very famous place on the Norfolk coast, which is full of seals.
Yep.
We've got a large group of volunteer seal wardens looking after it for us.
Excellent.
But we still get the problems of people going to down.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Any comments? Answers it. Any more?
Yeah, Andy, when you were talking...
Ray, could you just say who you were, in case everybody doesn't know you?
Sorry?
Say who you are.
Ray Clark. I've been going around saying local. You were talking in all the parks, they have a duty to the general public, they have a duty to interested parties, landowners, businesses. So it's an unenviable task. But how do you gauge what the public actually want from our park? Or any of the others? How do you do that?
Well, I think to be successful, you've got to use lots of different techniques. Some of them need to be face to face. You need to go around parish council meetings and set up your own public meetings in the park. You can do a lot online. When we had to make the cuts here, we did an online survey, which would have been completely unsuccessful, except we got huge coverage in the regional media, and we got 1,000 responses. So we could actually profile what people were saying were their priorities. So I think you need to be really imaginative, but what you mustn't do is just ask people in the park. And I think too often the national park management plans and local plans have simply looked very, very locally. Now that's really important, and sort of the local residents in the park are sort of my family, and I sort of I love them, but they aren't the only thing, and the fact is they are national parks, and you've got to be really good about getting a proper cross section. And if you haven't asked the people who don't come here, then you've lost out on possibly the most important thing.
Yeah, Susan, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely agree, and I think the Nothing Was has been very good at asking a lot of people. I see the results of things like the visitor surveys, but I think particularly over the last year, when we've had changing visitors, it's going to be really, really important to capture their views, because they're often, as you say, they're not coming very long distances, they're perhaps half an hour away, so they're almost residents, and I don't think they've been asked very much, but we're getting an opportunity because they're coming to the park, we're getting the chance to talk to them. But definitely more needs to be done.
Yeah, certainly in the Dales we've noticed an awful lot of new visitors, new kinds of visitors, people from multi-ethnic backgrounds, and it's absolutely brilliant. But obviously they're at the start base, they don't fully understand what they're coming to, and that's maybe a very important audience that we should be addressing. I'm not quite sure how, but maybe it's a challenge.
But if I may just
please,
my reason for asking is because certainly around here, the local, in the press, and indeed some of the campaigns from like the RSPB, it's been all about the dangers of burning on the moor. It's going to destroy all our blanket fogs, or the the signage, because I know you made a comment about we need to put up signs to direct people. And I felt a little sad there because I thought, are you listening to that key demographic? Because they've got it on their devices. They are so tuned in a way that perhaps we aren't. And is that sign still there? And if it is, how clean is it?
I think it just depends on the precise location and nature of it. I mean, one of the things I've always been against is having signs and being persuaded to cut paths into heather moorland because there's a right of way there. I think the element of exploration and wilderness is vital. But then there are simply other places which are very near urban areas or near honeypot sites where you want to take a different approach and you should sign better. I think it depends where.
Right. Oh, a couple more, yeah.
Colin Pearson, a member of the North Yorkshire National Park. And this is to Andy really. At the moment, the parks have got statutory rights with such as planning. Is there anything you would like to see be controlled by the national parks, and why?
Yes, I mean, as I said in my talk, I think that the park management plans should identify in broad terms what sort of vegetation is in the public interest in different bits of the park. And that implies therefore that the park has to know that, and that I think you should reach by a deep process of consultation. But having established that, the park then has to have some purchase on that. And that could take the form ultimately of direct management, or more normally, negotiation and incentive. But management then involves a whole load of things. It involves what you plant, and it involves what you burn, which might be what you're getting at, Clive. But I mean, I think that we can't dodge these questions. Fire is a very important management tool used worldwide by conservationists, but it can do great public harm. And so we just need to just inject into this whole thing a much greater direction by the wider public interest.
Yeah. I mean, it has been a major problem in the Pennine the last couple of years, is huge moorland fires. I'm thinking of Marsden Moor in particular, and terrible damage has been done to wildlife. So it is a real, as climate change happens, this is going to be more and more of a risk, isn't it, to moorland managers? Yeah. Maybe it's we need to get the public more engaged in prevention. I think just pop the last one, because we are getting onto Rose's time.
One for David. I was actually quite surprised and rather disappointed that you don't anticipate any change over the next 10 years around the burning philosophy, bearing in mind the increasing awareness of the detrimental health impact of burning smoke, breathing in smoke, and also with our climate crisis in terms of the sky dumping of the carbon, that you haven't considered looking at alternatives. We always get told about, we need to burn in order to stop wildfires. Well, the last few wildfires we had have been caused by managed burning getting out of control. We have the one down by Scaling, that managed burning out of control. I mean, it's not impossible, it does happen. Well, I'm not saying you have to stop all burning.
I wasn't asked. I was asked.
Are you looking at alternatives?
Yeah, okay. Of course we are. Yeah, and in common with George's with George's Moorland Association, of course we are. We're already cut in certain places because we have to as part of our HLS scheme. And I was asked if we would be continuing to burn in 10 years' time, and I wasn't dismissing the health and public interest benefits. I didn't say that. So I was asked a straight question, and I gave a fairly direct answer. But of course we've got to take into account. We're surrounded by villages off our moors, and we're acutely conscious of that. And we've had two. We actually had the Cleveland and Teesside and Scarborough environmental health officers on the moor last year, explaining to them directly why we burn and how we burn, and showing them examples. And actually they went away much better educated. But I'm not, to be clear, I'm absolutely not ignoring any public health benefits. I didn't say that. I was asked if we were going to continue to be burning in 10 years' time, and I said I hope we were, because it's important for the reasons I articulated.
Great.
So.
I think it's a probably ideal spot, and this could continue in the bar afterwards, could it not? to really thank our contributors, not only for superb presentations, I think we all agree, but handling your questions so deftly.